All right, good evening. Tonight we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Ayin Tes, starting at the very top of the page at a fresh Mishnah, going 2/3 of the way down on Daf Pei Amid Aleph. These Gemaras are reminiscent of like Maseches Shabbos types of Gemaras in regards to Rishuyos, as you'll soon see. But today's Gemara will make a very clear and sharp distinction between the world of Shabbos and the world of Gittin. The Gemara starts at the top of Ayin Tes Amid Aleph at the Mishnah. Hayisa Omedes al Rosh Hagag. She's standing on the roof. He's got a good arm. Vizarkula, and he throws it to her. Kavan Shehiyah Le'avir Hagag. Once the get has crossed the threshold into the airspace above the roof, Harezu Migureshes. That's case number one of our Mishnah. Case number two, what if he's standing at the top? Hula Malavi Hilamata Vizarkula. If he's standing up there and instead of throwing it, he drops the get to her. Kavan Sheyatzim Irshus Hagag. The second it leaves the airspace of the roof, then even if Nimchak or Nisraf, if the rain came while it was like in the middle of a downpour and the water bled out all of the ink before it got to the bottom, or nisraf, or it caught on fire somehow on the way down, harez and migureshes, because the second he let go of it, it was already considered mishtameres and it's hers. The Gemara says, I don't understand. The first case of our Mishnah where she was on the roof and he's throwing upwards, says the Gemara, hello mintar, when it's on the throw on the way up, it's not really mintar. It's not over the roof. It's just an upward trajectory. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel begag sheyesh lo ma'akeh askinan. We're talking about a gag that has a ma'akeh, and what we're talking about is where if he's down here and she's up here, he throws the get up, and this is the ma'akeh, and once it crosses this threshold, then she is considered to be divorced. And Ula Bar Manasi gives another one, Mishmei de Avimi, and he says Amar. We're not even talking about a makeh. We're talking about where it's on its way down and it gets within 3 tvachim of the ground. This person's name is Ula ben Manasya. Today, for the first time in about 2,000 brisim, a parent named their child after an Amora. They named their child Eloi. And not because of Rabbi Eloi.
Israeli?
Russian. There were a bunch of Israelis in the room. I don't know what the Israeli component was, but they named their kid Eloi. Ayin Yud Lamed Aleph. Eloi Noah. I was shocked. I've never thought Abaye. We've never heard an Abaye or a Rava.
There is somewhere out in Abaye. It's in Abaye.
Really? I was just very. She said to me, she's like,
Huna.
"Oh, Huna." Yeah. So she said to me, "Is this a common name?" I said, "Like Eli as an English name is common, and Eli is not really a Hebrew name, but the name Eloi is a name in Shas. What can I tell you? I've never heard it." And that's what they did. They named their kid Eloi. Yeah, like, could you imagine like Ula Bar Manasya? It's just so fascinating. All right, let's continue. At the 2 dots, 10 lines down. The second case too, Hula Mala, when he's standing up there, the second he drops it, we said she's divorced. Why? So he is standing up here, but there are outer walls that are taller than this roof. So when he drops it here off the roof and the outer wall is taller, it's mishtameres. And therefore she's considered divorced. And this answer is repeated by a number of other Amoraim. V'chein Amar Rebbe Lazar, Amar Rebbe Shaya, Kigon Shay Mechitzos HaTachtonos, Otvos Al HaElyonos, that the outer walls of the beyond the building, the gates of the property are taller than the building itself. V'chein Amar Ula, Amar Rebbe Yochanan, Kigon Shay Mechitzos HaTachtonos, Otvos Al HaElyonos. Very good. Amar Le Rabbi Abba Ula Keman, who is our Mishnah like? Ki Rebbe, throwing us all the way back to Maseches Shabbos, to Amar Kluta Kimi Shehun Chadamya. In our Mishnah, when we say that the get is in the air and she is Migureshes, why does that work? The Gemara recommends that perhaps it's because of the Shita of Kluta Kimi Shehun Chadamya, that once the get is in the airspace, it's as though it's munach. What was the case of Maseches Shabbos? So imagine that over here, to my right, is one Rishus, a Rishus HaYachid. And this is a Rishus HaRabim, and this is another Rishus HaYachid. And I have got an arm. I take a football, I throw it from this Rishus HaYachid over the Rishus HaRabim, and it lands in another Rishus HaYachid. So the Akira was in Rishus HaYachid, and the Hanacha was in Rishus HaYachid. Do we say that you violated an Isser according to Rabbi? Yes, because Kluta Kimishon Chadamya, when it's flying over, it's as if it's resting on the ground, and we seem to be applying this din over here. That's what the Gemara is recommending as a possible link between the world of Shabbos and the world of Gittin. And the Gemara says that's not correct. A third of the way down, Amar Lei, he says to him, Ula says back to Rabbi Abba, I disagree with you. In this case, afilu tema rabbanon. Here, even those who argue with Rebbe and say kluta is not kimishun chadamya, even here they would agree, because ad kan lo pligi rabbanon alei de Rebbe elu inyan Shabbos. The only time the machlokas of kluta kimishun chadamya exists is in Hilchos Shabbos. Aval hacha, in regards to a get, mishum inturehu. Over here, what we're talking about is whether or not the get is protected as it relates to the world around them, as it relates to wind, as it relates to fires, whatever the case may be. And v'hakamintar, in a case over here in our Gemara, where we said that the outer walls are greater than the inner walls, the outer walls are taller than the building on which he stands. So under those circumstances, we would say that they're taka divorced because of kluta, but not kluta of Hilchos Shabbos. By kluta Hilchos Shabbos, we remain with the machlokas Rebbe and the Chachamim. By Gittin, there is no machlokas. And this conversation was similarly repeated. The same answer was given in regards to our Mishnah. That why is it that when it's dropped, it's considered automatically to be a get? We said because the outer walls of the property are greater than the height of the building. And there, this must be correct. And he responded to him, that's not correct. So the Gemara says, just saying, repeating the same exact story with another Amora, that we said that we're more concerned when it comes to Gittin about Shmira. We're concerned is the get being released in a safe place. So if I'm standing on top of a building right here, and I reach off the building and I drop it down, my wife is in the yard outside. So if the walls are taller than my release point, if the wall goes up to here and my release point is like this, good to go. That's considered mintar. It must be kluta kimishon chadamya like Rebbe. No, here even the Chachamim would agree that it's considered to be divorced because we're not dealing with Gittin as it relates to Shabbos. We're dealing with Gittin as it relates to Shmira, and therefore they would be divorced under those circumstances. We're at the two dots, a little bit more than halfway down. Nimchak. We had said that once the husband releases the get from the top, he reaches out. The second he releases it, they're divorced, even if the ink gets watered down in the rain, or nisraf, or if it even gets burnt. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, Lo shanu ela b'shenim chaderach yirida. The only time this is true is when the husband is dropping the get, and as he drops it, the rain rinses off all the ink. Aval nimchak derech aliyah. But if the husband is throwing from the bottom, the first case of our Mishnah, if he launches the get upwards against the rain, and the rain then washes out some of the words, lo. In that case, they would not be divorced. My taima, because, and this is such a splitting of a hair, but it's an important one halachically. Halacha is that world of splitting of hairs. Says the Gemara, my taima, because me ikara lo lemenachkoi. On the upward trajectory, it's not going to her. It's going to land after it peaks and goes to the downward trajectory. So when he's standing over here in the ground, he throws up the get, the rain rinses out all of the letters, but always on the upward trajectory, they're not divorced. Because that upward direction is not her. Only the peaking and then the downward direction is her. So subtle, massive differences with tiny words. And mamzerus and all the other issues that come about. Huge nafkaminas. What about the case of nisraf, 2/3 of the way down? We had said in our Mishnah that if the husband drops the get off the top of the building and it ends up getting burnt by a fire on the way down, so it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravu, Lo shanu ela shekadam get l'dleika. That's only true if he released the get before the fire was present. About kadma d'leika, the get if the fire was present first, then lo, then that would not be the case. Why not? My taima miikara l'sreifa kaza, because the natural flow of events, you dropped it into a fire. You're a fool. You thought it was going to get there. Why would you think it's going to get there? You'd had to drop it through a fire to get to push it. It's going to get all crisped up, and it's not going to work. We had said that properties are considered distinct in regards to Gittin. These are not easy words to understand, but we'll soon see from the flow of the Gemara that this is referencing an earlier conversation where we said that a husband is willing to loan one part of his property for the sake of divorcing his wife, but not two. That's what these words refer to, and that will become crystal clear in a number of lines. How does this older man know this? Namely, how does Rav Chizda know that a husband is willing to lend one part of his property, but not two, in order to get divorced? Amar le, it's mas nisan here. We're going to learn a Mishnah, but let's just be clear. This is a multi-step answer to the question. We're trying to figure out, how do we know that a husband is willing to lend one part of his property in order to let his wife get divorced instead of multiple of them? So let's start with our Mishnah. Here's step number one of the answer. The Mishnah says, Amar le mas nisan. Our Mishnah says, Haiso medes al rosh Hagag, This is case number one at the very top of the page. She's standing on the roof, the Zarkula, and he's on the ground and he throws it up. That once the get reaches the airspace of the roof, they're considered to be divorced. What must the case be? Begag dida, excuse me, if it was her roof, dida, and he's standing below in her backyard, why do you need to throw it? Just put the get down. Says the Gemara, why do we need this whole sophisticated case? When it crosses the threshold, no, the chatzar is also hurt. Ella must be begagdi day, bechatzar day. Maybe we're talking about a case where the roof is his and where the chatzar is his. But says the Gemara, if that's true, who cares? If the roof is his, if the rooftop is his and the chatzar is his, then again she wouldn't be divorced from the avir. So what is the mitzias of ownership in regards to our Mishnah? Our Mishnah had said that she's going to be divorced in the case of Haisa Medes al Rosh Hagag v'Zarkula, but we don't know who owns what. Says the Gemara, 12 lines or so from the bottom, Elapshita must for sure be the case that it's Begag Dida v'Chatzer Didei. It must be. She lives at 123 Main Street. He lives at 121 Main Street. They're actually neighbors now. Very bad for divorce, but they're neighbors now. She's standing on her roof. She's standing on her roof at 123 Main Street. He's standing next door at 121 Main Street. He says, I hate you. Here's your get. And from his backyard, Chatzer Didei, he throws it up to her, Begag Dida. In that case, that makes sense in our Mishnah why the second it crosses the threshold of her roof, they should then be divorced. Perfect. Guru Kimta. But says the Gemara, that's a problem because a Maseifa, in the very second case of our Mishnah, where it's on the third line of this page, there we learned Hula Malabi Hilamatav. He is on his roof at 121 Main Street. Milamatav is Arkula. At the second it releases his hand, she's going to be divorced. So says the Gemara, what's the case over there? If we say that the Reisha and the Seifa have the same case, if the roof is hers and the ground is his, he dropped the get from her roof to his field, that's not a divorce. Elad must be must be that things are flipped in the Seifa. And would you want to say, this is the last of the very short lines, would you want to say Reisha begagdi da, b'chatzer begagdi day? Would you want to say the Reisha is where she owns the rooftop, and the Seifa, the second case, is Seifa begagdi day, where the rooftop is his v'chatzer dida? No, of course you wouldn't want to say that. Elalab, what we see from here is this principle that we were trying to show, which was the din of Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda taught us a din of Reshuyos Chalukos Begittin, that someone is willing to lend property to someone in order to get divorced. A husband is willing to lend property to his wife to get divorced. Elalab, it must be first of the middle width lines and the only middle width line to Oshla Makom. To Oshla Makom Chad, he's willing to lend one place to her. To Chad Makom Mushli Inshi, Trey Makom Mushli Inshi. So that's how the Gemara brings a raya for Rav Chizda, that we have this idea that one property can be lent to a spouse. That's normal, but not two. And the Gemara says, Amar late, that's not true. Midi Iria, is it necessarily the case? Perhaps it's exactly like you said. Maybe case number one is Dilma Hakad Isa Vakad Isa. Maybe case number one is different than case number two. Maybe case number one is Reish Begagdi Davachatzer Didei. In the first case, when we said that she's on the roof, and if he throws it up to the roof, they're divorced, that's because the roof is hers. It's Begagdi Davachatzer Didei. So he's throwing from his property to hers. The second it crosses the airspace, they're divorced. And Seifa, in the case where he was on top of the building and she was below the building, perhaps Seifa Begagdi Didei, where the roof is his, V'chatzer Didei, the field is hers. That makes perfect sense too. Each of them, he's throwing from his own rishus in both cases. Why does it have to be that way? So maybe it's not the case. Maybe our Mishnah, we don't know. We're not sure if our Mishnah is that the Reisha is Begagdida and Seifa Begagdide and the Seifa is flipped, or if our Mishnah is all talking about his property, but he's willing to loan one piece of the property and not multiple of them. We don't know. As mentioned, our Gemara does discuss in Yonei Shabbos as it relates to Gittin, because the get has to pass the threshold, and a lot of the very beginning of Hilchos Shabbos speaks about that as well. So therefore, the Gemara says, there are three things you need to know about Gittin as it relates to Shabbos. First of all, the machlokas that we have in Maseches Shabbos about kluta k'misha huncha very early in the Maseches and Shabbos Daf Daled, that which we saw the machlokas of Rebbe and the Rabbanon, that's hani milid inyan Shabbos. That's only true by Shabbos. Aval hacha mishum inturehu v'hamintar. Here by Gittin, we're only talking about mintar. We're only talking about is the get protected. If it's protected, yes, great. If not, not. So therefore, the difference between Shabbos and Gittin as it relates to kluta k'misha huncha damya is that by Gittin we're concerned about transfer of reshuyos as it relates to the isser of ha'avar of Shabbos mirishus to reshus. There we have the machlokas Rebbe and the Rabbanon. Kluta k'mishun chadami. Rebbe says it is the case that that it is considered kluta. It's considered to be landing, and the Rabbanon argue. But that's not the case over here by Gittin. We don't have the same machlokas of kluta. Everyone would agree that once it passes the threshold, if it's as long as it's mishtameres, as long as it's safe, if it's mintar, then she'll be divorced. That's point number one of Rabbah in regards to the midos begit. Here's point number two. We learned in Maseches Shabbos on Daf Zayin in the name of Rav Chizda. No, it's kind of Rishus Hayachid. A person puts a very tall pole in Rishus Hayachid. Uberosho Traskal. There's a basket on the top. The Zorak Banachal Gabav, and a person throws from outside that Rishus into there. So says the Gemara, if he throws it in there, if he look Machayev, the Fisher Rishus Hayachid Ola Adarakia. Because the din is that a Rishus HaYachid, once you have a Rishus HaYachid, it goes out of the Rakia. In Rishus HaRabim, it's not that way. You get to 10 Tvachim, you're done. But if you build a house that it goes all the way up to the heavens, that's considered a Rishus HaYachid. So that's only a din, Hani Milad Inyan Shabbos. The din of Traskal is only a din of Shabbos. Aval Hacha, Mishum Inture, who here we're only talking about Inture, and therefore you would say, "Hello, mintar." That's not safe. You're throwing it well above the walls of the property, and therefore you're not considered to be divorced if you throw the get from Rishus HaRabim into the Traskal. Distinction number two between get and Shabbos. This brings us to the top of Ayin Testament base, where the Gemara says the point of Rava. What's the third nakuda of Rava? The Gemara says, if you're my house and your house, let's say we're neighbors and we don't have the Chicago 8 feet apart from one another, we can reach each other's roofs by leaning over. Fine. So says the Gemara, by Hilchos Shabbos, we have a din that you're not allowed to reach from my Rishus HaYachid to your Rishus HaYachid. It's considered a Nisr D'Rabbanan, and we don't do that. And I can't collect rainwater from your roof, says the Gemara. Why? Because just like our places of living down below on the street, there's a distinction between my property line and yours, a different pin, different address. So says the Gemara, and therefore from my Rishus on the roof to your Rishus on the roof, I'm not allowed to transfer something from one Rishus HaYachid to another, even if there's nothing separating. It's a din d'Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, that too is not a din by Gittin. Hani midu l'inyan Shabbos. That's only true by Shabbos. Aval l'inyan get mishum kpedahu. In regards to get, it's all about whether or not he's makbed. And of course, if he wants to divorce her, he'll say, "No problem, you can take the get off my roof. I don't mind." V'kulehai lo kapti inshi. So therefore, these are three distinctions that Rav is highlighting between the world of Shabbos and the world of Gittin, where yes, the halachos appear to be of a similar genre, but they're in fact unrelated to one another. Ayin Testament base about 6 lines down. There's 2 chatzeros, one very large one, 10,000 square feet, and then there's another chatzer on the inside that's 5,000 square feet. So says the Gemara, in such a case, penimis shelo v'chitzona shelo. The inner 5,000 square foot chatzer is hers, and the outer 10,000 square foot chatzer is his. U'mechitzos hachitzonos, the walls of the outer mechitza, namely of the outer field, they're od fosala penimios. So the walls of the 10,000 foot square amma, whatever it is, this chatzer, the walls are 50 feet. The penimi is the one that she owns is only 25 feet. In such a case, if vizar kula, he threw it to her, so then the second it gets to kevin shekia la'avir mechitzos hachitzona, even if it gets to the outer wall, she lives on the inner wall. It doesn't matter. Harei zu migureshes. And the Gemara and Rashi speaks about this. My time of, let's first finish the Gemara. Sorry, my time of, why is it that she'd be divorced? Because pnimi is kufa b'mechitzos hachitzona kamintera. The fact is that the inner chatzer is protected by the outer walls of the chatzer, and therefore she's considered to be divorced. Rashi speaks this out as well. Masha ein kain, however, this is not true with kupos. This is not true with boxes. Let's say I have the large size of the Lowe's, packing box, and the small size, the small one's inside the large one. Let's say the inner small box is hers, the outer large box is mine, and I throw it to her. Even if it's over the threshold of the inner box, they're not divorced. My time, why is that true? Third of the way down. On Ayin Tes Amid Beis says the Gemara, the halonach, because it's not resting. And even if it does rest, who cares? After all, she has her kli inside his kli, and therefore it's Caleb shel lokech b'rishus mocher, and we haven't really concluded about that yet. It says the Gemara, the boxes that we have are not very good boxes; they're really just walls. Bekupa she'ein la shulaim. There's no bottoms. So in that case, Nach would have helped for it to be hers, but it would not be hers until it lands on the ground. In regards to the boxes, she would be divorced even if it broke the outer wall, because the outer wall was taller than the inner wall. a Mishnah, halfway down on Ayin Testament Bays. Most nisin Beis Shammai Omer Poter Adam Ishto Beget Yashan. We're going to learn what a get yashan is. We've already heard this a dozen times in this Masechta. Get yashan is where a couple was in yichud after the get was already written. And there's a potential that we would need to get a new get in order for them to be divorced. Does a get yashan work? If they were in yichud after the get was written, so they write their get on Aleph Elul, they're in yichud on Beis Elul. And then on Gimel Elul, they want to get divorced. You need a new document. So Beis Shammai Omer Poter Adam Ishto Beget Yashan. Don't worry, you can use the get yashan. It's fine. It's still kosher. Afal Pita, there was yichud. Beis Hillel Osern, he says, no dice. You have to write yourself a new get. Of course, that's how we paskin, and this has come up many a time in this Masechta so far. So again, as mentioned, the case of a get yashan is where a person was in yichud with his wife after the get was written, but before the get was given. So again, the game is like this. Aleph, he writes the get, Beis there b'yichud, and Gimel of Elul, he gives her the get, Machlokes, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, if they're divorced. The Gemara says, B'mai kamiflage. What is the Machlokes, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel? Why does Beis Shammai allow for a couple to get divorced with a get yashan if they've been in yichud? And why doesn't Beis Hillel allow for them to get divorced with a get yashan? Says the Gemara, it must be that Beis Shammai Savre lo amrinan gzer shem yom rugita kodem libna. No one's going to assume that they had a child out of wedlock based on the circumstances where dan the kafschus, we assume that they're going to keep halach. Beis Hillel Savre amrinan gzer shem yom rugita kodem libna. It's not true. You're going to have an ear, or people are going to say you're not from. You got divorced and then got pregnant, which is, well, it's not mamzerus. You got pregnant from the same person. It's not mamzerus, but it's a pigam on the person. So according to Beis Hillel, according to the Gemara, the reason why we don't allow for this is because of potential pigam and what could be perceived as tashma shamita, out of wedlock and having a baby. And the Gemara says a little bit more than 2/3 of the way down, Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel im nises. What if a get yashan was given and she got married? Even according to Beis Hillel, lo teitze. That she doesn't have to get divorced. Meaning, midina, a get yashan does work. It's just a chashash derabanan that we're afraid that a person is going to have a negative thought about you, that you had a child out of wedlock, because they don't know the metzias. They don't know what actually happened. V'ika de'amrei, that this line of Abba bar Shmuel was different. Amar Rabbi Abba bar Shmuel im niskarsha tinase lechatchila. This is a different phraseology of the same idea, that if they are niskarsha with a get yashan, then she can remarry lechatchila. Okay, very good. This Mishnah is going to highlight cases where a divorce is so complicated that everything is thrown at the woman. Everything. All the chumras are thrown at her. It's really, and for him too, actually, as we will soon see. This Mishnah is a little difficult. We have some real cases of yibum that are thrown into this Mishnah on Daf Pei Amud Aleph, and we're going to be going about 2/3 of the way down, and then we'll stop. But what we're going to be starting with is a din of writing the date on the get. And whereas any balabas would have said you should write today's date, it's whatever tesvav it's not tesvav anymore. It's tes zayin, yud zayin already. Yud zayin now. It's yud zayin av. So let's say a couple wants to get divorced tomorrow morning. He goes to the sofer, please write a get. We would have thought yud zayin av. Says the Gemara, no, it needs to be written b'shem of the malchus. So if we lived in the malchus of Madai, we'd say for the 20th year of the reign of the king of Madai. But says the Gemara, what if the date that you wrote wasn't really in proper form? What if kasav l'shum malchus she'ena hogenes? What if you wrote it about a malchus that wasn't hogenes? We'll learn about that today. Or l'shum malchus Madai, or l'shum malchus Yavan. Or what if you wrote it lebinyan habayis? X number of years from when the Beis HaMikdash was built, or l'churban habayis, X number of years from when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Or if he was in the east and it was written that he wrote it in the west, and the opposite, in all of these cases, and buckle up because this is not fun, in all cases, if she were to have gotten divorced with this kind of get and remarried, she needs to divorce from both men. But get she can't live with them. She needs a get from both of them. She doesn't get a ksuba from either man. Velo peros, no fruit benefits. Velo mizonos, no food from them. Velo belos, no clothing. Lo alzeh, velo alzeh, not husband number one, not husband number two. Im not lamizeh, and if she did take from them tachsher, she has to give back. And if she got pregnant from somebody else who have vlad mamzer mizeh without having gotten a get first from both of them, seemingly machlokes Rashi Tosfos, if this is a din doraisa. And says the Gemara, velo zeh v'zeh Mitamina, if they were kohanim, they could not become tamei for her. Below zev zezak coin, neither husband. This is turning to the husbands now. There cannot be zakai loba mitziasa, her lost items. Loba ma'aseh they don't get her money. Loba afars nedared, they can't control her nadar. And haisa bas Yisrael, if she was a bas Yisrael, nifselas mina kahuna, she would instantly lose her kahuna. Top of payam adal, if she was a bas levi mina meiser, she'd lose out on meiser. Bas koin mina truma, she'd lose out on truma. And ve'ein yorshin shel zeh, yorshin shel zeh, yorshin ksuvasa. Nobody gets a ksuva, seemingly a duplicative line because we already spoke about this. If one of the husbands died, wow, like throwing the book at her like this. And the Gemara is going to ask this question because somebody wrote the date for Malchus She'enu Hogenes. We're going to have mamzerus and like mamish some real issues, real major issues. Unbelievable. The Mishnah continues with a little bit of a calms down for just a second, but not much. This, at least we understand. Shina Shemo Ushema. If the names were written wrong, Shem Irov, Shem Irov. The cities were not written correctly. The discussions here is that the city she's born in, the city she lives in, whatever. In all of those cases, Teitze Mizeh Mizeh, and same rules as before. B'chol hadrachim ha'eluba. All of the drachim, all of the things that we just said over the last 10 lines, all the horrible things that she's now stuck with, and him too, they apply if the get was given without them having noticed that the names were incorrect. That's what the Gemara says. Okay, let's go back to Daf Beis and Maseches Yevamos.
Yeah.
We had learned the din in that Mishnah. Let's talk about a case where Ruvain and Shimon are brothers. Ruvain has a daughter, let's call her Malka, and Shimon's allowed to marry Malka. Shimon's allowed to marry the niece. But if Shimon dies without children, Malka can't fall to Yibum to her own father. That's just ABCs, right? Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, if Malka has a tzara, because Malka is completely not allowed to marry her father, so then the tzara, who's completely not related, she is off scot-free, no yibum is allowed, and no chalitza is required. So says the Gemara, Kol harayus she'amru that tzarosein mutaros. In all cases, when we said that the tzaros is allowed to go free, even without chalitza, like this case where Shimon married Ruvain's daughter, and if Shimon died and Malka had no children, Malka's father is Ruvain, the brother of her husband, they cannot marry. So then Chaya, who is the co-wife of Malka, gets to go free. But says the Gemara, if halchu hatzaros ha'elu v'nisu, if let's say Chaya goes out and gets married, she gets married, v'nimtu elu ailanis, and we actually find that the Yavama, the initial one, Malka, was actually an islandess. That means she was never really married to Shimon, which means that Chaya was married to Shimon, which means that Chaya is really in a bad spot right now because she never did chalitza. But when we find out that really Malka, her initial wife, was an islandess, so now Teitzim Mizeh Mizeh, then Chaya, the tzara who got remarried, she's in a really bad place, because she should have done chalitza. We didn't make her do chalitza, but we wouldn't have assumed that Malka would have been an islandess. What?
Until later.
We wouldn't have known. So it's not like anybody did anything wrong. She followed all the rules. But the way the chips fell is that knowing now that Malka is an islandess means that Chaya needs to do chalitza. She didn't, because Allah is not structured that way, because the percentages of people being an islandess are so small. We weren't concerned about it. And v'chol hadrachim ha'eluba, same exact dinim would be true. All of, again, throwing the book at them, all of the halachos, mamzeros, everything that's listed in the bottom of Ayin Testament based in the Mishnah on the top of Peimanov would apply. And similarly, 10 lines down, Hakone says Yavimto, one who does in fact marry a Yavama, here it can't be someone, it has to be someone that's mutter to them. So let's just talk about Ruvain and Shimon let's say Ruvain and Shimon might well be brothers, they are brothers, and Ruvain marries Rachel, but Rachel's not Shimon's daughter. And then Ruvain dies, Rachel marries Shimon. So Akone says Yivimto, Shimon marries Rachel, and then V'halcha tzara, so V'niseis la'acher, and then the tzara, she leaves and she goes to marry someone else. V'nimse zu shahaisa islandess, teitzim mizeh mizeh v'chol hadrachim ha'eluba. That if we're in a case scenario where the Yavama was found to be an islandess, then again, same rules. The difference between this case and the previous case is very subtle. In the previous case, the Yavama couldn't do Yibum because the Yavam was her father. And in the second case, Yibum actually took place. And still, if she turns out to be an islandess, the halacha is that we do undo everything. Says the Gemara, Kasav Sofer get liish v'shover liisha. Let's say that a Sofer was tasked with writing a get for a man to give to the wife. He also wrote the shover. He wrote the receipt that the wife will then give to the husband that says, thank you for your 200 zuz. The Sofer made a mistake. The Nasan get leisha. He gave the divorce papers to the wife. The shover leish, and he gave the receipt to the man. So he gave the wrong documents. The husband thought he had the get. He actually had the shover. The wife thought she had the shover. She actually had the get. They finally get to the day. They're standing in Bezdin. She puts out her hands, and the husband hands what he thinks is the get. It's actually a shover. It's just a receipt. And she hands him what she thought was a shover is actually a get. So none of this actually works. And then they both go and get married to other people. Yikes. They're not actually divorced. Now we see that none of this really worked out the way that it was supposed to. So the din is the din is that we throw the book at her, because not that she did anything wrong necessarily. She did, but she didn't know. Who is really to blame? Honestly, they should have looked at the document. The sofer should have given the right documents to the right people. And the husband should have looked to see that it was the get. And the wife should have looked to see that it was her shover. They didn't look. Now that we are where we are, not good. And we throw the book at. But this is a machlokas. Third of the way down. Rabbi Elazar Omer, im la'alter yotza ein ze get. If we find out right away what's going on, then it's just not a get. But im la'achar zman yotza, then harei ze get. And says the Mishnah, closing off this Mishnah, lo kol heimenu min harishon la'abed zechuso shel sheni. That says the Gemara that sorry, I just lost my. Oh yeah, lo kol heimenu min harishon. Not everything that happened with the first can cause for the losing of the rights with the second. This is something that we're going to have to spend a little bit of time on a little bit later. But if we just take a look quickly at Rashi, take a look at Rashi 3/4 of the way down. La'abed chuso shel sheni shenisa, that she got married to. Darmin and kinunya hi beinehem v'chlifu ashtaras la'achar shenises. Says the Gemara that all of this happened after they got married. And this scenario is convoluted. It's very difficult to say that they're still married. How could it still be a get? Okay, we'll discuss in the Gemara. One last mini sugya, and then we'll stop. What is this malchus she'eino hogenes? We had said at the beginning of the Mishnah on Ayin Testament Beis, the second Mishnah, the one at the bottom, that if the date that's put on the get is listed as the number of years of King X from Malchus Y, so what's malchus she'eino hogenes? Says the Gemara, malchus haromiim. It's a Roman government. If we were to write in a star at that time, let's just say post the destruction of the Churban, if we wrote 10 years from the King X of the Roman Empire, doesn't work. Why is it that they're called a Malchus She'eino Hogenes? Not for any of the reasons that we would have thought. They're evil, they're horrible, they destroyed the base of Mikdash, nothing. Says the Gemara, Mishum de'ein lehem lo ksav v'lo lashon. They don't have their own language. They don't have their own tongue. They don't have their own handwriting. It says Rashi, right at the beginning of the Gemara, 15 lines or so from the bottom of the page. They poached. They took from other places. It says on the side here in the Hagos V'Tzionim, it says, B'dfus Yashan Lifnei HaTzenzor, before the censorship kicked in, there was something else in our Gemara. No Saf, what was added was the Hainu Dichsiva Pasuk in Ovadia, Bazui Atame Od. You guys are disgraced. And the censors, again, I don't know why they didn't just burn every Gemara, but the censors left most of this. They just took out the scathing rebuke that was to have been a comment about the Romans. Amar Ula. Ula asks the elephant in the room question, halfway down on Peyam and Aleph. I don't understand. What was the reason why we had that the local government had to be there? So, for example, maybe in a get in America, we'd have to say the English date, out of respect for the English country that we live in, the American country, because that's the language of America. I don't know what people do, Lemaisa. What dates, what dates are put in the get, Hebrew or English? It's all in Hebrew, right? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Yeah, you have to look. I wonder if we do an English date. I don't know. because that's what the din of the Mishnah is. I have no idea. Anyways, what's the reason why the date and the get has to reference the government, the country in which you live, the government? Mishum shlom malchus, because it's good politics. If they saw the document, we'd want them to know that we are patriots and we like living in the country that we live in. Says the Gemara, umishum shlom malchus teitze ve'avlad mamzer. I agree. In the Fum Riata, the first reaction is, you have this little sprach of an idea that you want us to write a get with the date that's relating to the Malchus, so that we don't end up having a war or whatever. Forget a war, just a dislike from the government. So if the psul in the get was that, and you wrote Yud Zayin Av, or if you wrote Ein Hogenes, therefore the kid's going to be a mamzer, and the Gemara is completely unforgiving. That is 100% correct. Rav Meir Lataime, the Amar Rav Hamnuna, Mishmei Deula, Omer Hayer Rav Meir, Kol Hameshana Mimatbeh Shatavu Chachamim Begittin Havlad Mamzer. If the Chachamim, if a person doesn't follow the format in which the Chachamim set things in place, the din is that the Vlad is a Mamzer. I got a phone call today. I got an email. I called the person back. A man from France, a Jew. He told me Davin's at Chabad. He has an accent, but a good English. We spoke for about 15 minutes. And he said to me, so I'm from France. My wife is from Mexico. Yellow flag. What's going to happen here? Is she Jewish? Is she not Jewish? So I said, tell me about your family's ancestry. He's like, so that's why I'm calling you. He said, my wife did a conservative conversion. Where did she do it? He told me somewhere in the suburbs. I think somewhere in the suburbs here in Northbrook. And I did it with she did it with a conservative synagogue. And I know you're an Orthodox rabbi. I wanted to know if you're comfortable with that, right? First of all, that's a zero. And I told him, I said, I'm going to be transparent with you. The Orthodox community, Jewish law, doesn't embrace conservative conversions. 50, 60 years ago, whole different Misa, because a lot of the Rabbanim back in the day who were conservative rabbis were Orthodox guys, or YU Rabbanim, whatever. There were a lot of frum guys, but they were, trying to engage the public, whatever it was. So he was very polite about it. I thanked him for being so polite. I said, you're the top 1%. These are hard conversations, and I know that they're hard, but you're really being a mensch. But he's like, no, I really do know. It is hard for me. He's like, but I really do know. And that's an extreme sample of violating halachic terms. But we're not even close to that. This is internal. That's not halachically violent. You're doing something not the way the Chachamim wanted. And therefore, your marriage is a zero. Mamish midoraisa. And therefore, yes, the answer is that it could be that there's mamzerus, because kol hameshana mimatbeh, your divorce is a zero. Correct. Your divorce is a zero. In this case, it's probably true in all frames, but I said it the wrong way. You're right. So we're going to stop right here. Yes, the Vlad will be a mamzer even for a din d'Rabbanan. We'll pick up on Shabbos with the Shum Malchus Yavan. We do have a lot to learn on Shabbos, but I wasn't able to prepare more today. Pei Aleph and Beis is a little meaty, but we'll make it. We'll make it like we always do. Wishing you all a beautiful night.